On the clock. So the biggest part of ceramics is timing, and that's just got to do with when I make the thing, how do I know when to keep making? How do I know when to stop making? How do I know when to set it aside, wrap it up, and wait a couple hours so I can do the next thing? Because you can't always do everything like step by step by step by step, because sometimes the physics of it just don't work out. So we're going to get into a little bit of the scientific background of clay, and we will have a quiz on this in a couple weeks. However, we're going to do a Kahoot, which is sort of like a group study session, and if everybody participates, whoever participates in the Kahoot will get 2 bonus points, and whoever wins the Kahoot will get 5 bonus points. So it's not so much that the information is going to be like drilled into you. It's more like this is important to help you work on your own work. All right, so we're going to get started. All right, can everybody see the intro to ceramics, terms and techniques? I just need somebody to say yep.
Yes.
Cool, perfect. All righty. So clay, what is it made of? The formula for clay is Al2O3 SiO2 2H2O2. And break it down, that's alumina, silica, and water. And those are the basic components of a clay body. And those will change, varying depending on what kind of clay body we're going to be working with. But that's the basic formula. That is it in its, purest form. And that water is chemical water, and that's going to be important to remember in the future. Now, I have this tattooed on my arm because, you get asked enough and you've got to have the answer on the spot. You might as well save it forever. So we've got a bunch of varieties of clay, and that's where that basic clay formula sort of comes in handy. And we're going to work with a couple of these, but we're going to talk about all of them because all of them are important and all of them are good to know about. We've got earthenware, stoneware, porcelain, fire clay, and ball clay. Kaolin is the purest form of clay. It's got the least amount of iron. So when we talk about clay being pure or impurities in clay, we're talking about iron quantity. And iron is what gives things like our earthenware, our Longhorn red, or our stoneware that darker coloring. So something that's like super brown or super orange, or even just a little more gray than like the stark white of a porcelain, has iron in it. And what that iron does is it actually lowers the firing temperature. And sometimes that's super helpful. Because if you see it says 3,272 degrees on that kaolin, porcelain stoneware, and that's pretty hot. That's crazy hot. And sometimes we need to be able to achieve pottery at lower temperatures without having to worry about it needing to go all the way to 3,000 degrees. Earthenware is what we are using right now, that Longhorn red. Earthenware is considered a low fire clay, and it's commonly known as terracotta, and we'll get into that a little more. So I'm going to go ahead and click over to the next slide. So earthenware, some of the earliest clays used by potters. It has the highest concentration of impurity, which allows them to be fired at lower temperatures because that iron acts as something called a flux and lowers the temperature. So flux is F-L-U-X, and that's one of our key words. They are usually darker colored, orange, red, yellow, brown, or gray, and that will change based on the region because clay, up until, the turn of the century, 1900s, was often just mined straight. We weren't mixing it in batches like we do now. We were just digging it straight out of the ground. So it was easier to get a hold of, you know, orange, red, yellow, or brown clay because it was just there in the backyard. Terracotta means baked earth, and the temperature range is 1728 degrees to 2088 degrees. That's pretty hot. You say that low fire, JC, that's crazy hot. It gets hotter, it gets hotter. So we use our terracotta for our sculpture clay because we want to be able to build things large without having to worry about them going into temperature shock. And the hotter you go, the more likely you're going to achieve temperature shock. And a lot of terracotta pots, like this one pictured here, are burnished and they are left unglazed. And the reason we leave them unglazed is because they're porous. So I don't know if you know about like chia pets, for instance. Chia pets are made out of terracotta clay and they're porous, so they can suck up all that like water and essentially act as like a watering system for those plants. And they do really well with just any plant because it doesn't necessarily take out all the moisture, but it'll hold enough to keep it watered for an extended period of time. Stoneware is our next clay. This is going to be the most commonly used variety of clay. This is the one we're going to use for throwing. It can come in various colors from white, gray, dark brown, dark gray. I even have a variety of clay that is actually like a deep black color because it's got something called manganese in it, and it's gorgeous, but you know, it comes with its own set of problems. These clays have fewer impurities, which will allow them to reach a higher temperature. The temperature range for stoneware is 2,150 degrees Fahrenheit to 2,330 Fahrenheit. That's a little bit hotter than those terracotta clays. The mix we're going to be called is B-mix. B-mix is a stoneware that we would consider porcelaneous. So it looks like a porcelain, and sometimes it'll act like a porcelain, but it will have the sturdiness of a stoneware. So what's the difference between earthenware clay and stoneware clay, you might ask? Well, big difference is the temperature range and the coloring. Obviously, we've sort of already addressed that. But stoneware is a lot better at mimicking other things. So it's going to be a little smoother. It's going to react with chemicals a little better, and it's easier to vitrify. And vitrify is another one of our terms, and we'll go over that a little bit later in the presentation. But it's vitrification is super important with pottery. Porcelain clay. This is clay in its purest form. When we think about porcelain, we think about like fine bone china teacups. And over here on our image, we have the one on the left is stoneware that's been glazed clear, and the one on the right is porcelain that's been glazed clear. They're the same cup, but you can see on this one on the left, you can see all those speckles, and that's that iron trying to come through in the body. And this one is just like transparent almost. It's a fresh canvas for painting on. So this is clay in its purest form. Very little iron is present, which allows the clay to be very white. When used very thinly, porcelain can become translucent. So you can make lamps out of it. You can do just all sorts of things. And I know there's a bunch of really great artists out there who really play with that translucency, and they'll build a sculpture behind a translucent piece of ceramic, and they'll cast light through it, and you can sort of see the silhouette. It's very cool, and I can show you those later. Because these are free from impurities, they fire to a high temperature. Some will even go as high as 3,272 degrees. That is hot. Fire clay. Fire clay is something I have never used in my lifetime. I've never had a need to use it, but basically it is super durable, and you can actually put it directly on heat. You can use it for cooking with. They often use it for bricks because it can withstand such high temperatures. With other ceramic objects, you can't put them like directly on heat. So you can't, for instance, put your porcelain baking pan right on the stove. It's going to crack right in pieces from thermal shock. However, you can do that with fire clay. And that's sort of a special facility that not all clays have the ability to do. So the other term was ball clay, and that one is sort of a funny term to think of because ball clay is actually, it's an additive that really doesn't live well on its own, but you can add it to any of these clays and it'll give it something called plasticity. And we talked a little bit about plasticity in our last class, but that's how stretchy or bendy something is. If something has plasticity, it can wiggle about and move in all directions without cracking or breaking. And we add ball clay to things to further along that ability to move, so that way we can make all kinds of sculpture without worrying about it just breaking in half. So important terms to remember: plastic, like I said, this refers to the clay's ability to bend without breaking or cracking. Wet versus soft. This refers to clay that is fresh and pliable. So when I say my clay is soft clay or wet clay, it is maybe fresh out of the bag. I haven't used it. No drying has occurred. I can shape and attach as I want. And however, this clay, because it is wet, will not retain its shape unless given a little bit of structural reinforcement. This clay has a lot of physical water and will be cool to the touch. So when we get into it a little deeper, we're going to talk about physical water and chemical water. Physical water is the water we add to things ourselves. So it's the water we get out of the sink to sort of add to our slip. It's the water that's already molecularly bound to our clay platelets. And what it does, when I say it will be cool to the touch, so when something is dry and it's made out of clay, that water, that physical water is evaporated out. It's gone completely. And it won't pick up the temperature in the air. So it'll be just room temperature. However, if something is wet still, it'll be a little cold. You can sort of feel whether or not something is dry just by like putting your hand lightly against it. And if it's cold, you're like, well, this still has water in it. It's not dry. Leather hard. This is clay that has dried but still retains moisture. This clay will keep its shape, but you will still be able to attach pieces and work with it. But if you were to bend it, it will break. The clay will still be cool to the touch because it still has that physical water. And I'm going to go ahead and do the last one, and I'm going to turn off the presentation for just a minute. Dry or greenware is our last reference for clay. So if our clay is dry clay or green clay, this refers to clay that has been able to completely dry and all physical water has evaporated and no longer cool to the touch. Your clay at this point will be very brittle. So if you were to just grab it, it will snap right in half. So you have to sort of have like delicate hands when we touch greenware. Leather hard, however, on the other hand, is super durable. In fact, it's more durable than either the wet clay or the greenware clay. Like you could drop a mug or a bowl that's leather hard and chances are it'll be just fine. Okay, go back.